You're watching NewsX. I'm Uday Pratap Singh. After the Taiwanese Foreign Minister Joseph Wu's exclusive interview with NewsX, China's embassy spokesperson has put out an abrasive statement on its website, stressing on the legality and validity of the so-called One China principle. The statement has led to Dr. Wu's office to tweet that neither India nor Taiwan are part of the People's Republic of China, and Beijing should focus on its floundering economy rather than attempting to bully its neighbors. Before we delve into this discussion with our panel of experts, let's take a look at some highlights of that exclusive interview of the Taiwanese Foreign Minister on NewsX.
I'm sure this is something that India cares quite a lot about. So if you look at the whole region, China's expansionism is one phenomena the democracies should care about. The Modi also has a string or a set of economic policies that would certainly bring India's economy to a new height. We also understand that the Indian leadership is targeting semiconductor as the next generation economic production, and Taiwan happens to be a powerhouse of semiconductor.
Jobinder Sachdev is joining us live, international affairs expert. We also have Madhav Nalapat, editorial director of the Sunday Guardian, live with us. Dr. GVR Shastri, political analyst, joins us live. Roger Liu, associate professor, Flame University, also is with us on the broadcast. Let me begin with you first, Jobinder Sachdev. What do you make of this very rattled reaction by China to this interview?
Thank you. There are a couple of things. One, I think, congratulations are in order for your channel and, for you getting this interview. That is one, because it was a very interesting interview, a very candid interview, a very forthright interview about how Taiwan looks at the world. And, in India, I think generally, and this point came out during the interview also as I was watching it, that in India, our image, our awareness, our knowledge of Taiwan is pretty sketchy at this point, generally, right? So this was a great interview for us and audiences in India to get what, the horse's mouth of Taiwan feels about. That's one. Secondly, yes, the other thing, concurrent with it or subsequent to it is the reaction from the Chinese embassy. Now, that itself, that is simply, kind of crossing the limits or, imagined limits whatsoever, etc. What an independent news organization does in any country is totally up to them. So when they are hectoring or lecturing you, of course, you'll look and see and the Indian government will see. But, here there's an interesting twist you can play in the game. You can, if I were to say, you can invite the Chinese ambassador for an interview and say to him, fine. Or I don't know, I see Professor Nalapat shaking his head, but I'm saying that why not create something out of it? Let them come and say what they want. But coming back to the, basics, it was a good interview and it does lay out some things, I think, which a lot of people already know. It was in a very forthright language that democracies versus authoritarian regimes. And he clearly identified, the authoritarian regimes wherein, of course, China, North Korea, Iran, and then, they are adding in Russia. We may have a different perspective on that, by the way, also. So on the whole, I think a very good interview, a very good interview for the viewers, for me and all of us.
Yes, let me get in Professor Madhav Nalapat as well. Professor Nalapat, what do you make of this very rattled reaction by China and the subsequent counter that has come in from the Taiwanese Foreign Ministry?
Well, I'd like to add my congratulations to NewsX for this interview, and I think it is a very, very good interview indeed. And I have no problem in the Chinese ambassador coming and answering some tough questions about democracy and about their aggression on our frontier. I think it's a welcome idea, and I think we should invite him and we should carry the interview. The fact of the matter is, this kind of a comment by the Chinese embassy, it's as though they're functioning in China. In China, you can order the media around. In India, you cannot. And may I remind you, Uday, the ambassador of China's concept of One China includes Arunachal, includes not just Taiwan, it includes Arunachal, Sikkim, Bhutan, large slices of Nepal, Ladakh. All that is their definition of One China policy. I don't believe that India would ever subscribe to that kind of One China policy. He has talked about the One China principle. The fact of the matter is, every country has got the right to define China in that country's terms. And One China policy of India is by our definition of the borders and boundaries of China. As far as Taiwan is concerned, I think way back in the 1950s or something, some stray remark was made. Otherwise, I don't believe in at least in this century and much before, India has ever agreed to the Chinese request, repeated Chinese request. Include Taiwan as part of one China. Include Taiwan. The Russians have done so. Iranians have done so. The Pakistanis have done so. I don't think we have done so. And why should we? Because their definition of one China includes Indian territory. Until they withdraw that definition and have a map that accurately reflects frontiers, for example, frontiers of the McMahon line, which they have accepted in the case of Myanmar, why should we, humor them? I'd like to congratulate you, frankly, for this particular protest letter. And may I remind you that NewsX and Sunday Guardian were among the first media channels globally to be banned by the Chinese government for quote unquote all kinds of tendentious quote unquote reporting on COVID. It was forthrightly reported about the origin of the virus, and the Chinese Communist Party banned NewsX and Sunday Guardian. I had said then, and I say to you now, that is a badge of honor, and this letter is also a badge of honor.
Yes, indeed. Dr. G.V.R. Shastri, let me bring you in here on what you make of this statement, these remarks by the Chinese. Do you believe it clearly shows that they do have something to hide when we see such a statement? Dr. Shastri? Okay, I think we've lost his connection there. But Roger, let me quickly bring you in here on what you make of this response and counter that is coming from the Chinese and the Taiwanese to this interview.
First, I would like to congratulate you for receiving this response from the Chinese embassy. You should consider this as a badge of honor, just like Professor said, Nalapa said. Well, we have to notice that the Chinese response is not towards the government of India or any department, ministry of agencies of government in India. It's towards a news organization which is considered to be part of the civil society of the vibrant Indian democracy. So by doing that, the Chinese government actually has been trying to interfere with the domestic politics of India, or it will like to urge the Indian government to interfere with that on behalf of the Chinese government. And this is totally intolerable because, well, we are two sovereign countries, and the government of China has no jurisdictions over, especially the freedom of speech in the Indian society. So by doing that, they are reaching out too far. And we have to notice that we should not let them establish this kind of precedents or the previous examples for this, because if you allow them to do that in the first place, they will keep doing that for the coming years or other examples. For example, if other political parties or other news organizations or other people who is not happy with China and try to criticize that, they will step in and say, well, you cannot do this because this is a violation of the One China principle. And this is totally a joke, because One China principle is what China has been trying to use to harness or to confine the diplomatic spaces of other countries. But well, of course they can do that. Well, they are a sovereign country. They can do whatever is fitting their national interest. But what they cannot do is to interfere with the domestic politics of the Indian society.
Yes, I believe we've also been joined now by Major General Shashi Asthana, a defense expert. Major General Asthana, welcome to the show as well. Major General Asthana, your first take, your interpretation, what can be read into the line, between the lines to these statements made by the Chinese and, of course, the counter as well?
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me for this discussion. Firstly, as far as their response, Chinese response is concerned, it apparently they don't understand what press freedom means. And since they don't have it in their country, they presume that everywhere else also the press can be manipulated, which is not the case. So I think this interview gives an appropriate reply to that, number one. Number two, what Chinese keep talking about one China principle. Let me, for the benefit of viewers, uh, give out as to where the lacunas are. See, one China principle, when they say, and when they say that the whole world has accepted it, it was based on the UN resolution. Now, the UN resolution was not that they are the China or there is only one China. The resolution was voted only for one reason, as to who is going to represent China in United Nations. That's all, nothing more than that. So UN doesn't say whether there are one China, two China, or half China, or one and a half China. That's not the case. Secondly, they talk of 1992 consensus, where they say that Taiwan accepted one China. Now, that consensus says, yes, there is one China, but the consensus does not say whether it is CCP wala China or it is ROC is the China. So, which is that one China? As far as President Tsai's interpretation is concerned, Taiwan is that one China. As far as, and many historians of Taiwan are concerned, that is one China. As far as CCP is concerned, they think that that is one China. They never conquered Taiwan by any stretch of imagination. So they have no jurisdiction on Taiwan. Secondly, when we talk of one China principle, it is Chinese government principle. It is not India's principle. And therefore, as was very rightly mentioned by Sushma Swaraj once, that we can respect your one China principle, provided you respect our one India principle. So therefore, so long they keep saying that Arunachal is theirs, they have no reason to expect from India to agree to one China principle. And therefore, in recent past, we have already started giving signals in a manner that President Tsai's her presidency, when she took over the oath, that was attended by two ministers virtually, and we are also now interacting. So that interaction is on, and thereafter now we are also interacting commercially, which we have been doing. Now let's talk of the second issue, that Taiwan is certainly, if there is a consensus which is defines as to what is a state. Now in that state, a state is supposed to have its territory, its governance, its currency, and Taiwan has more population than 2/3 of the countries and more areas than I think 50% of the countries in the world. So it it qualifies to be called as a country and an independent sovereign country. So these are certain facts which China would wish to ignore, and so far they have been able to coerce most of the countries to follow to fall in line, and taking the shelter of that UN resolution and also the shelter of US interest, because US agreed to them only for that reason, because they wanted to checkmate USSR at that point of time. Otherwise, they had no reason to agree. And that is why when they agreed, and when internal debates took place in US, that why have we agreed to this one China principle or so-called one China principle, then immediately after that, they signed the Taiwan Relation Act, because they knew that they have gone wrong somewhere, and therefore they need to build up Taiwan accordingly. And Taiwan is a democracy, and so are we. Taiwan has interacted with Taiwan has done fair amount of trade with China, and and it has every reason, and it is an independent country to have trade with us. As far as the interview is concerned, we have every reason to interview Taiwan, and we have every reason to interview China as well. Similarly, like I belong to an institute, I have been to Taiwan and I have done a course in Taiwan. I have been to China also recently in last September. And the same thing, similarly, in my institution, we welcome Taiwanese delegation. We also welcome Chinese delegation, and we discuss with both. So this is the kind of freedom in which we live in. And perhaps their attempt to launch influence operation, these are called as so-called influence operation. By influence operation, in a manner that they would like to sometimes give a lot of sponsorship to NewsX to toe their line, and if not, then a letter or a threat, they will try everything. but I'm sure as far as India is concerned, they can't do what they have been doing to some of the Western magazines, so-called very important US newspapers also, where they have bought certain stakes and certain shares. They can't do it here. So that I think is we are reasonably conscious of it because we are neighbors and we have to deal with China. So that's what my thought is. Yes, this is a part of influence operation, which they will continue and they will continue to do so.
Yes,
Uday.
yes. Also, the fact is that what has been also very, very interesting has been the Taiwanese counter to the Chinese. It was an extremely strongly worded statement. They didn't get bowed down or cowed down at all by the threat, Professor Nalapat, and said that and said that China should concentrate on its floundering economy rather than try to bully other nations, and also said India and Taiwan are not part of the Republic of China, and that's why free press is encouraged.
Uday, the Americans have done many foolish things in the course of their history, and one of them was the amazing amount of concessions that were given to China to basically stand against the USSR. Mao Zedong was against the USSR from the 1950s. This happened in 1971-72. There was no reason to give one penny to China because China was already hostile to the USSR. I don't know which individual, tricked Richard Nixon into believing that you have to give concession to China. And after that, the United States, Japan, Taiwan, these are three countries that helped China to become a global economic superpower. And all three countries are targets of the CCP. They were and they are targets. So China, frankly, has been helped by countries that it regards as enemies, and one country in particular, Taiwan, that it wants to swallow. Now, may I point out that more than 95% of the Taiwanese people do not consider themselves to be Chinese. Forget about communist Chinese. They don't consider themselves to be Chinese at all. You may have few people in their 70s and 80s and who say, oh, yes, we are still Chinese, but hardly anybody else. That is the reality. The people of Taiwan is a vibrant democracy, and they have flourished the democracy. They have shown, first, that even if you've got Chinese ethnicity, democracy is the best system for you, not dictatorship. And secondly, a democracy can do better than dictatorship. The Taiwanese per capita income is several multiples of the PRC per capita income. Standard of living in Taiwan is far better than the standard of living in China. They don't get dazzled by the few people, in some big cities. The fact is the majority of the population of China are terribly poor, a kind of poverty that you will not see in Taiwan. So I'd like to say, Uday, I'm glad NewsX has stood up, and the Taiwanese have stood up very clearly. And may I say that in Dr. Tsai, they have a tireless fighter for democracy. And in Joseph Wu also, a fighter for democracy. For Taiwan, democracy is real. Democracy is precious. It's something they're willing to fight for.
Yes, absolutely. Rabindra Sachdev, it's clearly, it comes through in the Taiwanese statement, isn't it? What did you make of that response? Very strong one, isn't it? Not meek or not to the point either.
Yeah, very blunt, very forthright. I mean, as was the content and the back and forth during the interview, similarly there. So obviously it indicates that Taiwan and going ahead in the years, because you see, this whole issue is now going to, if not narrow down, things will precipitate. If China, Taiwan, as a preparedness for quote unquote a blockade or a war is supposed to be partly maybe by 27, 28, etc. So this whole rhetoric and things will heat up. But I want to make another point, which I'm reminded when Professor Nalapat was saying something about, let's say, America helped China to become the superpower. In the interview that you guys carried, the Taiwanese foreign minister said that during our peak times, 80% of our foreign investment was going into China. And now he says we are down to 11%. So it also means that this group think, or we were all walking with eyes wide shut. Of course, hindsight is always 20/20. I'm not saying that, right? So, Taiwan may be nudged by America, maybe nudged by its own commercial interests, maybe nudged by the overall, trade, economy, business factors. If 80% of Taiwan's FDI or outward investment was going into China, that also contributed to China's growth as the world's factory. So, I mean, that's one interesting thing which came to my mind, listening to the interview and right now, Professor Nalapa's point. But overall, I think that, tension will rise up because, new US government in town soon, whatever. And Xi Jinping, in a big picture, has said that they will not leave the Taiwan issue to their next generation. I'm working backwards on that, right? 2047 is less than 100 years, that's too far. But when Xi Jinping and his coterie, remember, it's not only Xi Jinping, it's an entire school of thought, which is the ruling regime in China. When they say we will not leave this issue for our next generation, that means, okay, how many more years with the grace of God do people like Xi Jinping have? Maybe 75 or so, another 10, 15 years. So in the next 10 to 15 years, China will make some moves, drastic ones, apparently, right? Going by what we see. So this whole thing will heaten up, tighten up, and we can expect definitely China lashing out against, be it governments, be it against companies, or be it against media organizations like yours. I mean, a media organization carries all points of view. That's the role of the media. And as I think Roger said, China probably, or General Asthana or Professor Narabat, China does not perhaps really understand how media works, because they do think that, okay, we can mandate something to be the line and not. But that's not how how in a democracy, loud, argumentative, within India, we have zillions of noises, zillions of views. We will and we should be, and as will be in every country, even in the US. So this will, I think this whole tempo will go up, because the next 2, 3 years, 4 years are going to get more and more and more intense.
Yes, they certainly will. And now, also moving forward, what do you believe, Major Asthana, rattled the Chinese about this interview? Was it the forthrightness? Was it, the good questions asked? Was it the fact that, the Taiwanese FM chose to appear on Indian TV? What do you believe rattled the Chinese so much about this interview?
See, they are trying to establish a narrative that a peaceful reunification is a possibility. They are also trying to establish a narrative to Taiwanese people that the power balance is shifting in a manner that if we decide, we can do what we want, and therefore it is better that a peaceful reunification takes place. And they were hoping that maybe the DPP loses and some other power comes up, and they may be able to perhaps push the peaceful narrative. I have analyzed, and so has there is one Chinese general who has also analyzed, and he had published his article on in South China Morning Post. The cost benefit analysis does not allow China to attack Taiwan, period, because they Taiwan with China and Taiwan, it will only benefit United States and nobody else. So in Cold War 2.0, the moment they take this drastic step, they are a loser to start with. So therefore they know it. So everything short of launching an operation, they would like to do that. Whether it is in terms of firepower display, whether it is in terms of coercion, whether it is in terms of blockages, and whether it is in terms of everybody, coercing everybody who is dealing with Taiwan. So where you felt, you came in the fire line was in the idea of coercing anybody who is dealing with Taiwan, number one. Number two, when they talk of, now they are also hoping that maybe the Americans' involvement, as well as the Americans' force level, as well as the force parity in South China Sea. Because when we look at the force levels which can be generated near eastern seaboard of China and in South China Sea and near Taiwan, then China is in a reasonable position to balance out United States. So considering that, they think that going by the Sun Tzu's diktat, can we win without fighting? So they are basically trying to win without fighting. Can we win over Taiwan without fighting? But that's not happening in a manner because recent surveys in Taiwan, they indicate that they don't want to unnecessarily get into fight with China as well. So status quo is the most popular choice in Taiwan. And then there are 3 red lines which were given between China and USA. Chinese red line was Taiwan should not go nuclear. And secondly, Taiwan should not formally declare independence. None of these red line has been crossed. Similarly, American red line was no soldier of Taiwan no soldier of China no force should be used in Taiwan. There should be no forceful reunification. That was their red line.
Yes.
China has not crossed that
Yes.
red line too. So, considering that,
Okay.
both the red lines have not been crossed from both sides.
Absolutely.
But saber rattling is going on.
Which is why wonders why this kind of rhetoric is coming in. Roger, I'm out of time, but I'll leave a quick last word to you. Roger Liu.
Well, I think the Indian society should be aware of this kind of offensives laid out by China in the coming years. Well, they will have to play like the two-pronged strategies. Like they will play hard and they will play soft. So this is the hard part. So we will have to stand to our principles. That's very important. Whenever China is trying to intervene with the Indian domestic politics, it is the time for the Indian public to say no in a very loud sense and very clear. That's very important to protect our own national interest against the Chinese interference.
All right, let's leave it at that. My thanks to all of our guests for joining us on this discussion.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.